Vito's Way, a biography of Vito Marcantonio. Today we are discussing a House representative who best exemplified the cliche, a man of the people, but whose life was anything other than that of a cliche politician. In his district, Vito Marcantonio was the man of the paisanos, Puerto Ricans, and all people of color. As college students in 2025, we are inundated with notions of social activism. Perhaps we should study a time 100 years ago in the 1920s when standing for those on the bottom meant standing alone and in the rain. I am Fiona Petty. I was introduced to Marcantonio's work 7 years ago when reading Dream Streets, the big book of Italian American culture. I revisited this literature and more with my sources being La Voce di New York, the Monthly Review, the Ronald Reagan Library, Library of Congress, and Spartacus Educational. My purpose is like Marcantonio's, to honor the forgotten working man in word and deed. The one we are honoring today was known as Mark in East Harlem. Although he came when a name like his was hard to remember, much less pronounce, he set a standard that we still measure politicians by, a principled code of honor with exceptional efficiency. To quote him, I vote my conscience, end quote, a Catholic ideal that he brought to the mainstream. We will go through his three most meaningful accomplishments in civil rights, anti-imperialism, and community organizing. Let's first talk about Mark, radical civil rights leader. In 1902, Marcantonio was born to Italian immigrants in East Harlem, New York City's most concentrated slums, housing increasing numbers of Italians, Puerto Ricans, and Black Americans. 11 years prior to his birth, the U.S. held its largest mass lynching. Most lynchings were of Black Americans, but the 1891 New Orleans lynching was of Italians. Innumerable lynchings continued into Marcantonio's life, which is why he was one of the only to introduce the first anti-lynching laws. He repeatedly pushed these laws every year he was elected, and, quote, a decade before it became respectable, as per the Monthly Review. The poll tax was another discriminatory policy that Marcantonio introduced legislation against 10 years before the Civil Rights Movement. Because of his momentum, an amendment was made to repeal all poll tax laws in 1964. In addition to his work for mainland U.S. citizens, Marcantonio also invested in another group who were citizens in name only. Let's talk about Mark, Puerto Rico's de facto congressman. His district of East Harlem was known as the biggest Little Italy in the U.S. It was also known as El Barrio because of its heavy Puerto Rican influence. Marcantonio earned their vote by learning of their hardships, including their families in Puerto Rico. Before 1946, Puerto Rico taught English as the language of their schools, which caused an unnecessary rift in the culture and tremendous confusion for students who still spoke Spanish outside of school. Because Puerto Rico's resident commissioner of Congress had little actual power, Marcantonio brought the bill for Spanish being the language of Puerto Rico to President Truman, and it was signed. Marcantonio was also practically the only legislator who sided with Puerto Rican nationalists for Puerto Rico's total independence. He crusaded to repeal imperialistic U.S. policies that forced Puerto Rico into an abusive single crop economy. This was also during Marcantonio's time leading the American Labor Party. He co-founded this party to take on the lives of those he represented in the most literal way. Let's talk about Mark, the community organizer. Mark may have worked in D.C., but he deliberately spent each spare moment in the slums. He kept 2 offices in his district, both of which any resident could come into. After each election, hundreds of his constituents came to him with their problems, usually pertaining to money. He would take them all on a personal basis, speaking with them in Italian, Spanish, English, and Yiddish. He received over 10,000 letters a year from those seeking his help. He would respond by using his salary on them, counseling them on weekends, going to bat for them against landlords, and carrying bags of coal to tenements without heat. Due to scarce photo documentation, all this and more was only reported by those who witnessed him and considered him family. His acts of service were frequent, and not performances for a camera. Now that we've discussed these achievements based primarily on relationships, let's make it relevant to now. In closing, I want you to hold in your memory the basic attributes of a leader that Marcantonio lived in the rawest way. 1. In relation to civil rights, modern leaders should follow Marcantonio's lead by not waiting for an injustice to become well known before they're passionate about it. Secondly, he was nuanced enough to know that imperialism hurt more than foreign economies. Puerto Rican citizens suffered also, and they were not too domestic for him to focus his efforts on, even in the height of his anti-imperialism stance. Lastly, Marcantonio could not be further removed from the staged social activism of current politics. Leaders can model themselves after Marcantonio by remembering that fashionable causes only matter insofar as people matter. Outrage means nothing without action. We began by evaluating a man on his ability to stand alone in the rain, metaphorically. When Vito Marcantonio succumbed to a heart attack on the subway steps at age 51, he was physically alone and in the rain. But if you ask anyone who belonged to him in El Barrio in Little Italy, they will tell you they were with him and they were the weight in his heart that day. Thank you.